Good morning, everybody. Thank you once again for joining us. A study with One Source Ministries, continuing our study on wars and rumors of wars, and this one is going to be difficult. It's been difficult for me to put together, and I have to warn you that I'm going to continue to research and research and research. This particular segment is a work in progress, and you'll understand why as we go through it. There are a lot of names and places that don't seem to match up. And that doesn't mean that they're incorrect. It just means that we don't understand what the text is actually saying. So I want to put this as a disclaimer. Our first and foremost source is always the Bible. The Bible is the authority because the Bible is the Word of God. Anything outside of the Bible, we can look to it for historical reference. We can look to even maybe for some geographical reference. But ultimately, the Bible is our key reference. So with that in mind, let's get into the study. Last week, we identified the location of Ararat in eastern Turkey, the location of Babel in Shinar, which was Babylon, current day Iraq. We located the Garden Eden in the Nile Delta, in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were prior to the Exodus. So those are the three primary places we located, and the reasoning behind that, if you want to see it, go back and watch last week's. But then we went over the broad strokes of the inheritance or the division of land for Noah's descendants. Japheth, north of Shem, and the demarcation point was the river Tina, which may possibly be the river Euphrates. Shem, which is south of Japheth but north of Ham, and Ham, which is south of Shem. So that's the overlay. What we need to do now is study more specifically the breakout of how these descendants parceled out the land. And the only reason this is important, because we're supposed to be studying the book of Ezekiel, and we're far afield from the book of Ezekiel, but the reason this is important is the book of Ezekiel references several geographic regions that we have to properly identify, because if we don't properly identify them, then we will improperly interpret the prophecy that Ezekiel is putting forward. So that's why I'm going through all these pains to try and find where are these locations really. So let's look first to what the book of Genesis has to say with regard to Japheth's descendants, because that's the first descendant that is talked about. Even though the order of age is Shem, Ham, Japheth, it talks about Japheth first. It says, the sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these the coastal peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans, in their nations. And again, this all happened, this description is happening prior to the Tower of Babel, so we know that if they had their own language and they separated into nations, that separation had to have happened after the Tower of Babel. That's why we use the Tower of Babel in its location as the central point of reference, even though Mount Ararat is where they landed. So let's look at what the Book of Jubilees has to say about the descendants of Japheth. And Japheth also divided the land of his inheritance among his sons, and the first portion came forth for Gomer, to the east from the north side of the river Tina. And in the north there came forth for Magog all the inner portions of the north, until it reaches to the Sea of Miat. Doesn't mean it reaches the Sea of Miat, it reaches to the Sea of Miat. And for Madai came forth his portion, that he should possess from the west of his two brothers to the islands, and to the coasts of the islands. And for Javan came forth the fourth portion, every island and the islands which are towards the border of Lud. And for Tubal there came forth the fifth portion in the midst of the tongue, which approaches towards the border of the portion of Lud to the second tongue. And the region beyond the second tongue unto the third tongue. And for Meshech came forth the sixth portion, all the region beyond the third tongue, till it approaches the east of Gadir. And for Tiras there came forth the seventh portion, 4 great islands in the midst of the sea, which reached to the portion of Ham. And the islands of Kematuri came out by lot for the sons of Appershad as his inheritance. Okay? So, that's what the Bible has to say, and now I'm realizing that I forgot to put Tiras on the map. I meant to, and I forgot to. But let's look at these demarcation points. First, identifying Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey and the Tower of Babel, as we did last week. Now let's look at what we just studied, because the Bible talks about Japheth's land being the coastland peoples, and the Book of Jubilees gives very specific regions. To the north and to the east of the river Tina is Gomer. So his area, River Tina, if that is the Euphrates, Gomer's would be east and to the north. Then we have Magog to the north, the inner parts of the north. Then we have Madai, that stretched out to the coastlands and the islands of the coastlands. Then we have Javan, that had all the islands that led up to the border of Lud. We'll find out later that Lud's portion is most likely in this region. Then we have Tubal, that stretched out to the second tongue and the area beyond the second tongue to the third tongue. First tongue, Turkey. Second tongue, Greece. Third tongue, Italy. Then beyond the third tongue, we have Meshech. And then, what I forgot to put is Tiras. Tiras got this section here where it says 4 great islands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tiras. Okay? So, pretty clearly spells out that basically Japheth's property that he was inheriting was all of what we now know of Turkey and Europe, or at least southern Europe. So let's continue on to Ham's descendants. What does the Bible have to say about Ham's descendants? The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, and we'll see that the Book of Jubilees calls Egypt something different, but Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod. Nimrod, he was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. We know that that's Babylon, current-day Iraq. From that land, he went into Assyria, which is in northern Iraq, and built Nineveh, which exists today, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Egypt fathered Ludum, Anamim, Lahabim, Nephtahim, Pathrazim, Caslahim, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. I practiced those names for you folks, by the way. Holy cow. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Semarites, and the Hamathites. Afterwards, these clans of the Canaanites dispersed, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar, which is up towards current-day Lebanon, in the direction of Gerar, as far as Gaza, which exists today, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. So basically the whole territory of Israel today. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. And I put this question mark down here for a reason. Could this be the cause of conflict in biblical times, and apparently I can't type any better than I can speak. The reason that I put that is you'll see that there's a very different depiction of how Ham's descendants inherited the land. You'll see in the biblical depiction very clearly that Ham and Shem's borders seem to be on top of each other. They are fighting over the same territories, but yet in the Book of Jubilees, where it spells out more clearly where these people took their territories, we see a completely different location. It says, Ham divided amongst his sons the first portion. See, I can't read. And Ham divided amongst his sons, and the first portion came for Cush towards the east, and to the west of him Mizraim, which is actually Egypt, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan. Okay? So if you look at that division, and you look back at what the Bible has, or what the Book of Jubilees had to say in our study last week, because this is taken from chapter 9, not chapter 8 of the Book of Jubilees, you'll see something very clear. Why? Well, let me put where it shows. I put Cush here. To the west of him, Mizraim, or Egypt. To the west of him, Put. And to the west of him, Canaan. Okay? Now, where they exactly line up, I don't know. It says Canaan was on the water or on the sea, so maybe he's up here somewhere. Why did I intentionally put Cush south and east of Mizraim? There's a reason for that. Because if we study what the text said last week from the Book of Jubilees, it said Ham's inheritance was described as beyond the Gihon, towards, which is the River Nile, towards the south to the right of the garden, and it extends towards the south, and it extends to all the mountains of fire. So I pulled up a map of all the volcanic mountains in Africa. And where are the volcanic mountains? To the south, in this whole region here. So basically, the Book of Jubilees is saying Cush's, or Ham's inheritance, extended from up here in the region where the Delta Nile comes together, or the Nile Delta, which is the Gishon, and it comes down this way here. So it extends from this side all the way down to the south. It extends from there, stop clicking, over to the west and to the north to all this coastland. That's what the book has to say. So here's the thing that I have to point out, though. Again, the Bible is going to be our primary reference. It is always going to be our primary reference. So what I'm going to continue to do is I'm going to continue to study and study and study so that we can find out exactly where these locations are. Because the geographical references, just like the Bible has multiple references or multiple interpretations, so does the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees has multiple interpretations. So we have references we'll see in a second that reference common places today because they're making the assumption in their interpretation that these references are referencing locations in what we know today, or maybe they're making references to what the Bible earlier referenced, and we just don't know, because one interpretation says one location, the other interpretation says another location. But let me continue on, because this is where part of it gets confusing. Shem's descendants. It says, to Shem also, the father of all three children of Eber, the eldest brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, which the Book of Jubilees calls Ham, Asher, Appershad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Appershad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Ebemiel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they live extended from Mesha in the direction of Shafar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. The hill country of the east would be beyond the Tigris River that we know today. So that's why I say it's a little bit confusing, because if you just remember what the Bible had to say about Ham's descendants, and you now compare what it says about Shem's descendants, it basically seems to be talking about the same greater territory. And maybe that's why they had to divvy it up, because ultimately the reality is if they had all migrated towards Babylon, they would have all been in that region anyway. That's why I don't find that there's necessarily a conflict with any of these texts. We just have to dig deeper to look at where are these geographical references, and can we find them in extra biblical material. That's what I'll be working on. So let's look at what the Book of Jubilees has to say about Shem's descendants. And Shem also divided amongst his sons. The first portion came forth for Ham, or Elam, and his sons, to the east of the river Tigris, till it approaches the east, the whole land of India, and on the Red Sea, on its coast, and the waters Dedan, and all the mountains of Mebri and Elah, and all the land of Susan, and all that is on the side of the Farnak to the Red Sea, and the river Tina. So it is basically covering a pretty huge territory. But what I want to point out is there's a couple different references here. If it's from the Red Sea that we know today to the river Tina, which is way to the north, which is referenced the borderland of Japheth, and it's going all the way to the east to India, it's basically taking up all of the Middle East. I mean, we're looking at basically all of Saudi Arabia, because that would border on the Red Sea, all the way to the east of the Tigris River. So could that be a real demarcation, that they're basically talking that from all of Saudi Arabia all the way straight up to the river Tina? I don't know, because the river Tina that I am looking at as far as the river Tina is the Euphrates River, but we'll see in a second in this passage that it references the river Euphrates. So is that a wrong interpretation? I don't know. So we'll go on. And for Asher came forth the second portion, all the land of Asher and Nineveh and Shinar, and to the border of India. And it ascends to the skirts, it ascends and skirts the river. So now we know specifically where this region is. This region is right in the heart of Iraq and northern Iraq. And for Appershad came forth the third portion, all the land of the region of the Chaldees to the east of the Euphrates, bordering on the Red Sea, and all the waters of the desert close to the tongue of the sea, which looks towards Egypt. All the land of Lebanon and Sinir and Amana to the border of the Euphrates. So this is basically saying the southern portion, which would be Jordan north of Saudi Arabia, all the way over towards where Egypt is today. And for Aram there came forth the fourth portion, all the land of Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates to the north of the Chaldees, to the border of the mountains of Asher and the land of Ara. And they came forth for Lud, the fifth portion, the mountains of Asher, and all appertaining to them, till it reaches the great sea, until it reaches east of Asher his brother. Okay, so now let's look at this demarcation as it plays out. We already have the lands of Japheth to the north and Ham to the south. The first one was Ham or Elam, which was basically this region here, and could possibly be this region here. So it could be this whole section for Elam or Ham. Then we have Asher, which is to the north. Then we have Appershad, which would have been this section here. Then we have Aram, which was north of what we know now as the Tower of Babel, all the way up to Asher. And then we have Lud, that would have been in this region here. So are these actual regions? Are these the accurate territories? I can't say with 100% certainty, because the area that seems to be in question for me the greatest is, where is Ham's territory really? If this is legitimate, then Canaan is way out of place. And again, that's why I reference maybe possibly the territory that was described as Canaan's has always been in conflict, because if Canaan is here and he fought his way back over to here to retake what he had originally, who knows? All I can tell you is that the stories don't mesh up, and I'm always going to err on the side of going with the Bible, because the Bible is our guide. We're here for a Bible study, not an extra biblical study. Okay? But I wanted to show you very clearly on this map what the demarcation points were according to the Book of Jubilees, and how no matter what, the region of Japheth is not contested. It is always to the north, and it's always described as the coastland peoples. And there's no conflict there. And since we're studying the book of Ezekiel that references Gog and Magog and the surrounding locations, it's very important to identify where Magog is specifically. The rest of these aren't quite as critical to our study, but I'm still going to get to the bottom of it so we can understand where they are. So this week we identified the extended inheritance, the divisions of land for Shem, which were Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Aram, and Lud. Sorry for the missing comma. Then we had Ham, which is Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. And then Japheth, which is Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras, which I forgot to even include in this list. So those are the demarcations that we studied this week. Again, we're going to continue on in our study next week, maybe nailing down these a little bit better as I continue to study, but we're also going to get back into the book of Ezekiel to look at what the book of Ezekiel has to say, and other regions or other references to these regions and the wars, whether it's in the book of Isaiah or the book of Revelation or the book of Joel. And we're going to look at the similar prophetic imagery that's used in each, so that we can tie them all together and know they're talking about the same events, the same places, and the same times. So that's what we're doing, and that's the reason why I thought it was so important to go back and look at the history of how these lands were divided, so we could get the proper geographic locations, not somewhere way up in Russia. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the Middle East. We have to remember that the Bible was written by Middle Eastern people about a Middle Eastern culture and a Middle Eastern history for future Middle Eastern events. The Bible itself, all of it, is Middle Eastern centric. That's what we have to understand. All the references that we want to try and pull from anywhere that reference any place other than the Middle East, we're getting ourselves in trouble, because it is very clear that the Bible is all about the Middle East. Where is God ultimately going to plant himself? In Jerusalem, in the Middle East. So why would we be talking about any place else? So once again, we thank you. We're going to close off this study, as we always do, conducting communion as Jesus instituted and Paul echoed. And I don't say this every week, but I have to encourage you, as Paul did, not to partake in communion in an unworthy manner, because if you do, you bring condemnation upon yourself. So before you even pick up the elements, I would encourage you to just breathe a prayer of forgiveness, so that the Lord can wash you clean, so that you can enter into this, I'll say, remembrance ceremony with clean hands. So as we do that, we do ask that the Lord would wash over us and cleanse us. As we take this bread that is symbolic of his broken body, we know that Jesus said, "This is my body which is broken for you. Take and eat." So we eat. We know afterwards he took the cup and he said, "This is my blood which is shed for the forgiveness of your sins. Take and drink." So we drank. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for your love, your grace, and your mercy. We're so thankful that you saw fit to provide a way for us. And that, Jesus, you were obedient to the point of death. That you were willing to step out of your place of glory in heaven, to come and humble yourself, to be part of your creation, so that you could be the ultimate sacrifice for us. We don't take it lightly. Lord, I also pray that as we continue this study, that you would give me the wisdom that I need so that I don't lead people astray, that we always lead people to the truth, and that you give me clarity from biblical and extra-biblical sources so that we can really look at these maps and find out the true locations so that we can rightly divide the word of truth when we're looking at the book of Ezekiel and identifying the surrounding geographical regions that are referenced there. Go before us. Let your Spirit guide us. I ask all this in your precious and holy name. Amen. Again, thank you for joining us with another study of One Source Ministries. I pray you have a fantastic week and you join us again next week.